Welcome, everybody. We really appreciate you being here for this really important conversation about our kids and how we can support our kids in the future. I'm Kim Burgell. I'm the mayor of Eureka, and this is a real passion of mine. We certainly, mental health, we see the problems with mental health in our community, not the problems. We see the lack of care that happens in our community and the lack of things that are happening. But what we're here to tell you and show you, hopefully, is by talking to folks and experts, we can understand that there are things happening and we can continue to build on those things and to make positive improvements in our community, because that's what we want to do. A healthy community lifts each other up. And that's what our plan is here, at least in this initiative. So with that, I just wanted to really put a shout out. So as many of you know, I work at Eureka High, and I want to tell you about some of the innovative things that they're doing there for kids' mental health, which I really appreciate. So they just recently got a really large grant, and they've opened a wellness center. And with that wellness center, they have 2 chill rooms for kids. Say that you're having an issue, or maybe you just need 15 minutes to get away from everybody. You can get a pass from your teacher, go down to the office, and you can go to that wellness center and sit in the back in one of the chill rooms for 15 minutes. No electronics, but it's just an opportunity for you to go and chill. They also have this new program called SAGE, which is a peer support program, so that if kids are having a hard time, and you can hear more about SAGE Tuesday night at the council meeting during my mayor's reports. I have somebody coming to talk about that. But it's peer support for our youth, and it really makes a huge impact to have people that are willing to listen and to try and understand, and just to be that kind of sounding board sometimes for our kids. And then, of course, modeling that great behavior, wanting our kids to behave in a way that really is respectful, and trying to model that behavior, which can be delightful, as you can probably guess. So I'm really grateful, as I said, to see you all, and I hope that as we move forward in these conversations over time, that we will continue to grow in education and to be able to support each other and to get the appropriate information. I think oftentimes we are, as humans, afraid of what we don't understand, and this is our attempt to kind of bridge a little bit of that today. So with that, again, welcome, and I'm going to turn it over. There's great tabling happening. I'm going to turn it over to Jacob, our moderator. Jacob Rosen, everybody.
Hello. My name is Jacob Rosen. I'm a mental health clinician by trade. I'm the managing clinician for Crisis Alternative Response of Eureka here with the city. Thank you all for coming. Wanted to just kind of cover a couple things as far as decorum goes. First of all, everyone, thank you for coming. Today's topic is Today's Mental Health, Tomorrow's Future, Raising Resilient Children. We really wanted to focus on mental health for our youth, and especially with school starting. That's a big transition, so we really wanted to make sure that we address that. Would like to give a shout out to Behavioral Health for collaborating with us, and Eureka Police Department for also collaborating with us. Big Lagoon Rancheria and Two Feathers, Native American Family Services, thank you. And then we'd also like to thank Esmeralda's 2.0 and the Flower Boutique for the lovely flowers up front and the food. And if you haven't grabbed food, by all means, we have some down at the end of the hall there. So if you're hungry, feel free to get up and grab some. I'd also like to thank our amazing City of Eureka team. We have a pretty fabulous crew. Kind of this all goes in after hours and outside of their regular jobs. So thank you for everyone putting in the effort to make this happen. We're going to kind of have a bit of a different schedule today, in that we're going to have a presentation partway through. So we're going to kick off the panel introductions here in just a minute, and then we'll go into questioning. And then about 2:30, we're going to have a short presentation, and then we'll have a 10-minute break after that. And then after that break, we'll get back to questions, and we'll kind of move on from there. For questions, if you have one, we are going to use the podium again. I know it's still kind of an awkward setup for asking questions with folks sitting up on the dais and everyone down here, but it's kind of our best way to be able to have video equipment operating so we can get this broadcasted to as many folks as possible. If you have questions, just get up and come line up on the left side, well, my left, your right side of the room here, and then you can come up to the microphone and ask those questions. When you do, just please remember to speak your name into the microphone so we know how to have a conversation with you and what to address you by. And then also make sure that you're respectful, right? I mean, we really want to hold respectful, safe conversations here. That's one of our goals. If there's any disrespect or discrimination or, stigmatizing comments, disruptive behavior, I or Mayor Virgil may interrupt you and remind you to be respectful, and then we may ask you to leave if it continues. So just, again, we want to hold a safe space. Prior to asking questions, we covered that piece. If you don't want to get up to the panel and or the podium and ask a question, you're welcome to write your question on some of the note cards off to the side. That's kind of our way to be able to do that anonymously. So if you have a question, but being on camera and being up in front of folks just isn't your jam, that's fine. Write those questions, and then Laura will go and grab those note cards occasionally, and we'll be able to ask those to the panel. And then once you've asked your question, please give the panelists an opportunity to respond. If you have follow-up questions or anything like that, you're welcome to get back in line and ask those. But we want to be able to make sure that we have time for folks to be able to come up and ask, and that we get to some of the questions that are on the note cards as well. So without further ado, I'd like to kick off the panel introductions. So Martin, do you want to start us off? Yeah. I think you may have to turn your mic on too. There should be a button there.
Right there?
There you are.
All right,
Yep.
that's
Thank
different. You. Yeah. All right. Thanks for having this event. I think it's really important to have these conversations, and I'm really kind of excited to get feedback and listen to the community about what their ideas are and questions are. My name is Martin Stefan. I've worked for Humboldt County Children's Behavioral Health for about 17 years. And I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I've been a clinician with the county, also a supervisor. Now I do more program management, and currently manage our foster care behavioral health team, which is clinicians that serve primarily foster youth, and then also manage our case managers that provide specialty mental health case management to children and families, and then our parent partners, which are a group of staff that primarily focus on working with the parents of the children that are getting services through the county behavioral health. We have a wide variety of services, and I think we'll have probably a chance to go into some of those when there's questions. We do, the children's behavioral health teams tends to serve the most severe youth that are needed services in the county. We also have contracting agencies throughout Humboldt County. Some of them are like Remy Vista and Changing Tides, Redwood Community Services, Two Feathers, other organizations like that do a lot of contracting work, and they also provide specialty mental health services to Humboldt County children and families. And sometimes I think our county, the services can be kind of hard to access and people can get confused. I do want to just say up front, our access line for children's behavioral health is 268-2800. That's the line you would call if you, your child might need services or you want to get the initial assessment going. And that's what I would say recommend is to please call that number if you think you might need those services. I just don't want to go into all the little acronyms and things that we do right now, but I do want to say, just coming through the COVID pandemic and all the difficulties that we've had, I'm so glad we're having this conversation because there has been a lot of stress on youth in our community and in Humboldt and across the country. And I think we saw a big shift to more youth ending up in our local hospitals and needing more crisis work, more youth going to hospitals and needing that kind of support. And so we've been shifting more of our resources in that direction too, which has put stress on us, but that's kind of the thing that we're seeing. And so we're really glad that there are some movements happening to make some changes. We have an organization called Sorrel Leaf that's opening up a crisis residential facility between Arcata and Eureka that will have some beds available so that youth don't have to go out of county to get the more intensive services needs. And that's going to be a big game changer for us in the community for a step down place where youth that are really having acute symptoms can get some support. So yeah, I guess I'll just leave it there for the moment. And again, I'm just really glad to be here and welcome your conversations and questions. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Virgil Moorehead, and I'm senior, okay? So anyway, I'm the tribal chairperson at Big Lagoon Rancheria, located in Big Lagoon. I've been in that position for 39 years. So it's basically a small rancheria. We own the Hotel Arcata. I have to laugh when I heard Kim talk about experts, and I'm like, why am I up here? But anyway, my expertise, I guess, is from a practical standpoint, is that although we're a small rancheria, I was, actually, the Two Feathers Native American Family Services, which my son will come to a presentation here later at 2:30. I was a part of that, starting that back in 1994. And, I have to date myself. That was back in the Clinton years. And there was a lot of Department of Justice money available for domestic violence, sexual abuse, and that. And there was a lot of tribal stuff available. So my friend at Bear River at the time, they were just organizing. He wanted to write a grant. And I had been on boards for consortiums with tribes before, and I was kind of moving away from that. But they asked me to be a part of it, and they needed 3 tribes. And I'm like, I don't know, And I basically asked my dad at the time, who was the board. My mom and dad are board members, but and that's been the mantra of Two Feathers, was if it helps, do it. And I'm like, I know what that means. That means that I'm going to be sitting there taking care of this. So anyway, long story short, that's what happened. The Bear River and Blue Lake Rancheria started their casinos, and we took over Two Feathers and kept it going. And it was domestic violence, sexual abuse, and ICWA stuff, Indian child welfare stuff. So after my son came home a few years ago, we switched to the mental health services, and some of the things that he's doing are cutting edge right now in terms of the presentation and services we're providing, or how we're providing them. So for me personally, I coach wrestling. It's been a passion of mine. Next year will be 27 years of coaching. I did wrestle at Humboldt, and I tell the joke that I wasn't a very good student, but I got an education because I went to wrestle. So there were some, tribal government classes offered in the summertime through Indian Education, ITAP, which is still available, and some of that. And I started this, I was 24 years old. So, I've been around. I have to laugh when people talk about titles. Well, I've helped, some of my brothers get through college, that process. So I guess I was an educational director. We built a road, I had to go through the BIA to build a road. 5 years it took me to get that. So I guess I could be transportation director. Economic development, we own the hotel. We own 2 businesses now in McKinleyville, the clubs, which was a dream of mine. And you talk about mental health. I guess my standpoint was, we wanted to try to hit the youth before they got to the crisis area. So with the wrestling, I still do it. And there's million things other than I can do. And I actually had the privilege of having one of my wrestlers from McKinleyville make it to the top at University of Missouri, and was an All-American Division I, and to be able to sit there and watch him was great. And my joke with the people I was sitting with, I said, okay, I'm going to finish this tournament. I'm going to go back to McKinleyville, and I get to coach my little 5-year-olds. They just looked at me. I go, so anyway, my background is, it's varied. I mean, I've been on the Big Lagoon Elementary School Board. My son was the first kindergarten class that went through from kindergarten to 8th grade and went on to McKinleyville. We had 11 kids graduate. Of those 11, 9 of them were 4.0 or above the freshman year. So the small school classroom size, and we had music, we had art, we had all those different things that were offered at the time, because at Big Lagoon Elementary, when they took over the national parks, there was extra money that was designated at tax revenue that was designated toward the schools that was lost. So at that point, we had a lot going on. We had a great principal, Bill Hawkins. He used to greet the kids when they got off the bus, good morning, hug them. It's that kind of interaction with kids. It only takes one, to help them succeed. So I was on the school board there. I was on the United Indian Health Board 2 different times. I was on a couple of tribal national boards and reorganizing. So my background varies a lot, but I guess to wrap it up for me, now that I'm, trying to retire, but my kids aren't letting me retire because I still get to deal with the difficult things in the family, but that's okay. But I kind of put it in perspective to some people. It's like, what were you doing at 34 years old? And they look at me and I go, I was dropping my daughter off at college. And they're like, what? Because I was a teenage parent. And then it's like it goes from there. And they're like, wow. So I'm really in my 60s, but I'm really like 80 because I've been through so much. It's a young age, and the fruits of it are, that my daughter, she went to school at UC Davis, graduated with a business degree, and came back, and she's been working with me at the Rancheria since, she was 23. She's 47 now. And my son left Stanford University to come back and work in the community. And it goes back to what my dad had told me, if that helps, do it. Because I remember sitting in a tribal chairman's meeting, I'm talking about my son coming home from Stanford. He was working there. I mean, you get the percentages. I get the boast, but it's okay because I earned it. But you get the percentages to get into Stanford are astronomical, but to get hired there, they're even more astronomical. So once he got his doctoral degree in clinical psychology, they already had a job for him. So he left that job to come back to Humboldt. And so that's, so I was in a tribal meeting talking about he just received $1 million grant to start Two Feathers and start what he's doing now. And I remember one of the other tribal leaders said, wait a minute, Big Lagoon is going to have your son come back and work and they're going to provide services to everybody? I'm like, yeah, that's what we're supposed to do. And so I'll end it with that.
Thank you.
Wonderful thing to follow up, and I want to introduce myself.
I think your mic needs to be on.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's okay. It's okay.
On the thing.
Is there a button?
It should be green.
Okay, sorry, you guys. Thank you. I'm Laura Ziemer, and just like you were saying about being 60, but actually 80 because of all that life experience, I come from the world of Humboldt County's foster care system. And so I like to think of our foster youth as being potent because they have had an extreme amount of really rich, wonderful life experience, sometimes, tragic life experience at a very young age. And so I love the perspective that we can enrich, this idea of our youth and see them and see ourselves as having the privilege of having an opportunity during that really critical period. And so I come from this foster care world, which we've talked about, wanting to be an expert up here. My expertise comes from really my birth story, and a lot of my ethos around my birth story and my identity as a former foster youth and adopted youth comes from the incredible information I have about my own family history, which is deeply entrenched in Humboldt County. And so I'm proudly from these streets of Eureka. And I well, thank you. And because I am just incredibly proud to come from here. And my biological parents, who I want to include them and their parents and the parents before that, who my own biological family had been deeply entrenched in some of these generational cycles that ravaged through our families with drug addiction, mental illness, which we're speaking to today, and domestic violence, sexual abuse. And so I want to begin my introduction with a little bit of history about my own biological parents so that I can entrench them, even without their say, in some of this good work that we're doing, because I want them to get some of the credit. And so my biological family is just testament to the resilience of the human spirit. And my own biological mother was raised up in Honeydew and ended up in Eureka. And my biological father has family that's connected to Cooper. I'm related to Cooper, of Cooper's Gulch, so I have some pedigree here. And so my birth mother, unfortunately, was a victim of sexual abuse at a young age, starting, from 5 years old, perpetrated by a grandparent. And unfortunately, around the age of 12, some of her behaviors became inconvenient, which, when we're talking about a child who had been groomed since birth in these ways, it's no wonder in my mind that she started acting out, or in one way or another. But those behaviors were what was seen, not the root cause. And so she was sent to live with her estranged father that she had never met, so that she wasn't a blight on their reputation in the community. And so her biological father, who he himself had been raised and placed with an adoptive family from Eureka in Humboldt County, so he himself was a foster youth in Humboldt County that had been adopted. He gained custody of this 12-year-old girl and decided that he could make some money off this. And so she had never had a sip of beer or a hit off a cigarette, and he intravenously injected her with methamphetamine so that he could start pimping her out. And so that 12-year-old little girl, who she became a mother for the first time at 13, by the time I was born, she went out a window and down a fire escape within an hour of my birth. And I was fourth of six that she had with 6 different men. And all, 6 of us subsequently were lost to the system. And she was unable to reunify with 5 of us, but the 6 she ended up gaining custody and raising. But I am deeply entrenched in these issues because my biological parents met at a Narcotics Anonymous meeting that they were court appointed to, and they left halfway through to go basically hang out with this stranger that they had seen across the table. And both my parents met that night and decided to leave and continue their own self-destruction in one way or another, and go use drugs, get high, because it'd been a while, they'd been in jail, and I was conceived out of that situation. And so the person that is sitting here on this dais, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for this world that we're addressing. And I only exist because 2 people who were in a really, really dark place, 2 very lost souls, children that had fallen through the cracks, they had met, and I'm here because of that. And so there's no world that I can imagine or create that exists without that. And I was born severely prenatally drug exposed. My adoptive parents, who they were new foster parents, and Marion and Dr. Robert Ziemer, have been doing foster care since me. I was one of their first placements, and they were invited to come visit me in the hospital. And it was told that it was possible that I wasn't going to survive the withdrawals because I was born addicted to or chemically dependent on 9 different street drugs. And so they were visiting a newborn that may not have been returned home with them, to take care of, and they were willing to stand with me in that uncertainty, and make that brave choice. And they've continued to serve our community. And I was blessed to be adopted by that family, and I was raised in a home where we currently have a little 15-month-old, but they've been doing foster care for medically fragile newborns for 35 years. And so we've had over 120 placements of these children that are coming from our most critical, crisis situations, and our families that are in the most in the most struggle. And so I've been watching people, my own parents that I was blessed to be adopted by, dedicate their life to service of this community and to the children of this community, and basically just welcome new souls to the planet. And so that example of my adoptive parents and the wonderful enrichment that they showed us in how we were raised. We were involved in just incredible service opportunities, and so it led us to a life where we saw ourselves as problem solvers. And so that allowed me to reframe my own origin and my own birth as not this idea that I was born in this really unfortunate circumstance, but instead I see myself as have been given a front row seat to some of humanity's biggest issues. And when we're talking about the care of our children, it is our most critical issue. And to solve a problem, I was taught that you have to have intimate knowledge of it. And I'm sure everyone on this dais and everyone in this room and everyone we're addressing in Humboldt County, you all have intimate connections to a need, and every single adversity that we face only connects us deeper with each other. And I was given kind of too much exposure to all of us as we were newborns, so I ended up kind of having a crush on humanity, I would say. But I have kind of like I would say, like, kind of unending, like, love for us and for Humboldt County and for the children that we've been taking care of in our system and those families. And so my work, thankfully, I was at 18 years old and they invited me to come speak to a California state adoptions meeting. And so I started my work with foster care advocacy officially through that. And so they invited me to come up and just babble in front of a group of people like I'm doing now. And so I've continued to do that. I'm 35. And so for the last 15 years, I've been enabled to teach foster parents through the foster kinship care education program. And so the county and everyone, wonderful that I've worked with has allowed me to have a part in speaking to foster parents and having an opportunity to touch and at least hold the ear of these incredible people who are going to be taking care of our most vulnerable community members. And I just ground them in this idea that these children need to feel, and this is when we're talking about mental health, we're talking about feelings, not just feelings about the world, but our feelings about ourselves. And these children need to feel like it is possible for them to do great, beautiful things on earth. And some really unfortunate things, people like doing intimate betrayal to their family members, those type of things ended up, in fact, on paper, leading to me having an opportunity to exist. And it's exactly my gratitude for that opportunity and my excitement to basically accept all that life has to give me, because I feel like I'm kind of an intruder here. And how I've balanced out this idea that some dark origins kind of led to me existing is that I've adopted this idea that it is possible for this strange, silly little crack baby from Humboldt County to do important, beautiful things during my time here on earth that will have meaningful impact. And in one way or another, it means that the solution in some way, or the solutions had been birthed from not only like the issue, like the heart of the issue, but really the resilience of the victims of these systems that aren't protecting people. That resilience led to an opportunity, and in some ways for me to have an impact, and it helps me kind of release some of my fear and anxiety about the future if I can kind of see some of these wounds as being self-healing. And I think the solution can come from the deep recesses of those problems, and I'm excited to see that future. And so I guess that's most of what I want to say. So thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Jayme Clark. I am currently employed at Eureka Police Department as a mental health officer. I've been with the department for about 3.5 years and in this specific position for about a year. Prior to coming into law enforcement, I was actually a stay-at-home mom until I was almost 40. So this is my first career, which is interesting, but as a stay-at-home mom, I had done foster care. So my ex and I had fostered multiple youth and ended up adopting. We had every single one of those youth struggled with mental health. Their parents struggled with mental health. So that's how I ended up getting introduced in that area, which I didn't realize would bring me to where I'm at today and taking this position as the mental health officer for Eureka. The person prior to me specialized in being able to connect with veterans, and he's amazing. But I discovered that there are many youth in our community who are not being advocated for. I am on the front line for coming to calls where our children are in danger or at risk. I've been working with the school resource officer, responding to calls at the school where kids are in crisis. I feel like it's a privilege to be in this position where I get to be a voice and advocate for these youth that have nobody to advocate for them. And as a community, we are all those people who get to advocate for our most vulnerable youth. So that's who I am. That's what I do. Short and sweet.
Thank you to all of our panelists, and thank you all for being here. We very much appreciate it, and thank you to everyone who's come today. I'd like to kick off things with, well, I guess kind of a written question. It's not so much a question. One of the questions that was sent to our email was actually a shout out to the Bridges program, and that this person has had personal experience with it and really appreciates the Bridges program. And Martin, I'm wondering, is that something that you might be able to tell us a little more about so that folks kind of know a little more about what that program is? Because it is a fantastic resource in the community for children.
Yeah, I don't specifically work with the Bridges program, but the Bridges program is a collaboration between the schools in Humboldt County and behavioral health services. And so the schools have hired staff under these grants as well as behavioral health. And so we have clinicians that are working in schools throughout Humboldt County and basically doing kind of triage work as they see issues happening to students in a school and the school needs some help with that. They can step in, help make some referrals, get them connected with services, and try to kind of head off things that might blow up later on into something bigger. And then the school also has staff as well. So it's kind of this great team approach that's really working to kind of get in front of things before it gets bad. So that's the Bridges program, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah,
Sure.
we've worked with them, and I know Eureka Police Department has worked with them, and they really are a fantastic resource. So if anyone has any students that are in crisis or knows of a child in crisis at a school, they definitely have some resources there. Another question, and I guess this is kind of the other piece of it, is this person was also wondering if there are more plans to get more access to stress and anger management counseling in the Humboldt area for youth specifically. I don't know if there's expanding programs or if anyone knows of any resources.
I mean, we don't have any particular programs just for stress, but I mean, all of our staff are pretty well versed in dealing with anxiety and depression and kind of the things that might be underlying some of the stress. We do have, like in our juvenile hall, there is a program that works specifically on what they call aggression replacement. Which is about learning some moral and ethical ideas and how to think about problem solving in situations so you can kind of better deal with anger and things that might be coming up for you. But I guess that's what I can speak to on that. Yeah.
So it sounds like call that access line.
Yes, yeah. 268-2800.
So at this point, if anyone has any questions and wants to kind of come up and line up again on your right, my left, and come to the podium and ask questions, then we can do that now. Otherwise, I can certainly kick off with another written question. All right. Martin might be picking on you with this one again, but if anyone else wants to chime in, are there any efforts that anyone knows about to expand counseling services in the Southern Humboldt area?
I don't know specific efforts. We do have clinicians, particularly with foster care behavioral health, that do travel to Southern Humboldt. And then also our kind of regular clinicians also do travel. We don't have a permanent office down there, which can be hard in terms of seeing people in the community, but we have used the Family Resources Center down there, which has been great with us. But beyond that, we try to dedicate staff to Southern Humboldt as much as possible. But it's definitely an issue that, an area where we could see some growth for sure. Yeah.
Thank you. Laura, did you have?
Yeah, I've been interested in program development, and the county's been incredible in terms of working with our foster youth advocacy leaders and stuff to look at developing programs for foster youth, and that includes and so pre-pandemic we had things that had gone really far through the processes of being approved that were really exciting ideas for programs that also included highlighting Southern Humboldt and up east, Eastern Humboldt and Northern Humboldt, and really addressing some of the needs of the foster youth and the communities and the families in those kind of outlying regions. And so it's definitely something that's in development, is re-looking at post-pandemic how and what the current needs are, so that we can make sure that anything that we're doing to roll out will be really effective in our current state. So I was like, stay tuned, I guess.
Excellent. Leah, do you want to come ask a question?
So I have a couple of questions, several comments, but I taught special ed in Redway for 20 years, and there was a lot of kids with mental health issues, and this has been like.
Leah, I think there might be a button for the microphone up there. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
There we go.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Anyway, huh? Yeah. Okay. I taught special ed in Red. It feels funny to have my back to them, but that's okay. I taught special ed in Redway for like 20 years. And way back then, they didn't even think kids had bipolar disorder, any kind of mental health issues. But as I started teaching, I had the only primary special ed classroom down there. I had 3-year-olds through 12-year-olds. And a couple of kids, one little kid, he was about 5. He'd come to school happy, and by noon, he wanted to kill himself. And I was like, wow, this kid needs more help than I can give him. So I started working with parents, and I had parents with, no transportation, no money. And so I would drive kids, and there were no services down there for kids. So I would drive kids up to see Dr. Annaline and Dr. Edwalds and get these kids help. And I think probably there isn't enough education or help for special ed teachers to even understand a lot of the mental health challenges of kids. So I don't know if the schools have any kind of special training. I know NAMI has a program called NAMI Connections where they partner with schools and try and do some education. I also have a 8-week class called NAMI Basics, which is for parents who have kids with mental health challenges. I can offer that to the community. We also have another program called Family to Family that starts this coming Wednesday for parents, and it's an 8-week class that talks about mental illness. And although it's more geared for adults, this 8-week class does cover, basic brain biology and that kind of stuff. So I don't know, do you guys know of any particular training for teachers and special ed teachers about mental health issues with kids? I haven't heard of anything. I haven't been in the schools lately, but it's certainly now with COVID just exploding with these kids with anxiety disorders and depression. I went to Fortuna High probably 10 years ago. No kidding. This kid, I really like these kids, but this kid raised his hand and said, do they still do frontal lobotomies? Now that's where our kids are, it's hard for them to get the information that they need. So anyway, that was just one thing I wanted to comment on. The other thing I've been trying to think about is a support group open to the community for kids ages, I don't know, maybe 10 through 17, or I don't know the ages, but we have kids who have siblings with mental illness, parents with mental illness, and they need a safe place to talk. We have our adult groups, that I run 3 support groups, as you guys know, maybe know, maybe don't know, but anyway, I do 2 groups in Eureka, 1 in Redway, but these kids need a group. And maybe we just started at Fortuna High with Lupita for last year. She calls it a NAMI club, and we get pizza. I kind of mentored her to do it, and she does a mental health after school, during school. program for just any kid in the school to come and hang out. And she picks different topics to talk about. And I think it's a great thing she's doing. So maybe we could get that spread out more in the schools as well. So if you guys have any ideas about any of that, let me know. Maybe we can get something going for these kids. But I agree with Laura. Our kids are our most cherished, and all you guys actually, our kids are our most cherished possession. So if anybody wants to spearhead anything, let's go for it. Thanks, guys. And I didn't ask really a lot of questions, but whatever.
Thank you, Leah. Also, just a shout out to NAMI. They are going to have a symposium on November 4th. It's a Saturday, and that'll be another excellent event. So definitely encourage folks to go to that.
I just wanted to say, my gratitude to Leah. She does such great work in the community. And speaking of Southern Humboldt, Leah's been running support groups down there. That just wonderful work she's doing. I did want to mention just in terms of the teacher part, we do have, for some of our youth that are receiving specialty mental health through the Children's Behavioral Health, there's a service called Intensive Home-Based Services. It's like behavior aids that can be with a youth at home or in school or out in the community. And that's something that we can support a teacher who's struggling with a youth in their class. The goal is really to keep that youth in the class and in a normal setting, having normal social experiences. So that's just one support that we can offer sometimes in some of those classroom experiences. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on that from the panel? Okay. All right, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for having this conversation today, and I'm really privileged to be here. My name is Beth Hevlin, and I wanted to address Leah's question because I'm the coordinator of the 0 to 8 Mental Health Collaborative, and we just got a grant from the Department of Health and Human Services to continue work that we've been doing for the past 5 years, training a multidisciplinary workforce on infant, family, and early childhood mental health. So really focusing on children 0 to 3 and their families. And we just signed to have another 3-year grant with the Department of Health and Human Services to continue that work. So we'll be starting another cohort of trainers, up to 24 multidisciplinary, so they can be clinicians, they can be social workers, nurses. We've had doulas in our program. We've had nurses and playgroup leaders. And so please keep your eye out. We have a website. We don't have a lot of money, so it's not a very well maintained website, but the 0 to 8 Mental Health Collaborative does have a website. And my email contact is Beth Hevlin, BETHHEAVILIN @gmail.com. And I'll be partnering with the center in McKinleyville, the McKinleyville Community Collaborative, to be facilitating that training program. And it leads to a California endorsement in infant, family, and early childhood mental health. So I wanted to share that, and I wanted to thank you all for the work that you do. Oh, and I should mention that my co-coordinator of the 0 to 8 Mental Health Collaborative works for Eureka City Schools. And the social work, they're doing great work in the social work grants that they have, offering training to school-based programs too. So Katie Allen is through Eureka City Schools, so contacting her for information about really specific training for teachers and special educators. Okay, thanks.
Thank you for that info. That's excellent. And you touched on that training piece of mental health professionals, which is just so important. That's one of our kind of greatest issues in the field right now, is making sure that we're training up enough staff to cover the future, because we know the demand is going to continue to go up, and we know that we don't have enough professionals now. So thank you for spearheading that. We appreciate that. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on any of that. All right.
I'll just say, it's really exciting, the work being done with kind of the 0 to 5 population. We have more and more clinicians getting interested in getting training. We just had a group of clinicians go through what's called child-parent psychotherapy, which, that kind of makes sense. But it's a specific training to help address needs of very young children, 0 to 5, and working with like attachment issues with their parents, and just so sorely, really needed in the community. We're super excited to be part of that, and offering that training to support staff so they can better address the issues really early on when we get referrals. And I think a lot of people have been through counseling programs and social work. We just don't feel that competent in addressing some of the really early little kids. So this is great to have that support. So, yeah.
Agreed. Next question. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for all being here today. My name is Elizabeth McCallion. I'm a clinical psychologist. Yep. Can you hear me better?
It can adjust too if you want to raise it. There you go.
Great. Elizabeth McCallion. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm the director of counseling and psychological services at Cal Poly Humboldt. I am interested in learning more about what's happening in terms of prevention and treatment of substance use, specifically with our children in the county. We know that substance use and mental health go hand in hand. So I'm just curious about what's happening in the schools in that area, or just in the community in that area. So I guess that's a question for anyone. Thank you.
I feel like I'm.
Yeah, chime on in.
I'll just chime in. I don't. The substance use area is not my kind of programs, but we do have in the county we have the adolescent treatment program where youth can be referred to our substance use program, and that's open to I think it's 12 and over can get a referral to that. And those are a trained group of staff who deal primarily with substance use issues in the county. Beyond that, I don't really have any answers about what's going on beyond that. So
yeah, because I know like when I was growing up, there was like the DARE programs, and my understanding is that those were found to actually not be as effective. And so, yeah, I guess just a general question of are there any types of programming like that happening in the schools?
Yeah, I think it's something that could be better addressed and with more options for youth to explore. Because at the county, our program's fairly, small and kind of, it just serves treatment focused. Yeah. So,
thanks so much.
Yeah.
Well, I know too. I mean, one of the big things that really helps with a lot of that is keeping youth engaged, especially going through school and stuff like that. And Virgil, I know you do a lot of school activities. You've been on a school board. I wonder, do you have any thoughts on ways to help keep students engaged in school and in activities and kind of offering them a different path?
For me, I guess from my background in recovery, the drug's a symptom of the problem. So why do they choose to do the drugs? So and that's what I mentioned in my introduction, is try to focus on before, not the after. That's like a few years ago, a couple of tribal leaders were talking about building jails on the reservation. I'm like, oh, you guys, I mean, come on, and we need to get in front of it. And that, to be honest, that's an area that's really lacking. I know in the Native community here, it's but it's one of those things that nobody wants to talk about because it touches everybody, and it's the hard work to get into that because it's so personal. The activities pre-COVID at Two Feathers, we were hosting get-togethers every 2 or 3 weeks with the at-risk Native kids, and we were and basically what we did was we kind of replaced the parent or the guardian. We went and picked them up in our vans. We were replacing what was missing in terms of somebody that they can count on to be there for them. And I think that's one of the major things. Like I said, if you got one person can change a lot of lives. So we were picking them up, taking them back, and all over the county. We'd have different events in different areas of the county, and we're averaging 60 to 80 kids on a Saturday, teenagers at risk. So my thing to my son was, you're doing something wrong, because those are the kids that if you're not doing something that interests them, see you later. But it was more activities of building a connection, a relationship, and making it comfortable, that they feel comfortable being there, welcoming them. And these were at-risk kids. So that was before COVID, and then, after that we had to refocus, and we're doing basically what we're going into the schools. I think my son will be here. He can explain. I don't want to get too detailed, but I think we have 23 licensed therapists now that we go into the schools and provide counseling services. We're working on like a teen house, or it's not even a teen house. It's a probably, like you have the Boys and Girls Club up here in Eureka. So we're working on something in Humboldt, and we just got a big grant to do that. That it's the wraparound service. It's everything. And then what we're trying to start from there is that after what we found, and the statistics show it, that the after they, you can work with them up through they graduate, and then if there's no foundation after they graduate, when they turn 18 to 23, 24, we're losing a lot of our Native youth there. So we're looking at some transition housing, job training, mentoring, having them mentoring themselves, the groups that train the kids to mentor the kids. And so that's kind of where our approach, it's innovative, different, but it's like my son, 'cause, yeah, I joke, I talk to him every day, but 2 different times, but it's not that hard. It's the people to make the commitment to be there for the kids. And that's the hard part, to find the people that are healthy to be there and be there for them, up or down. So.
Thanks so much.
Very important. Thank you.
I had a question about anyone knowing about the new program, New Leaf, that was going to open, and it was going to offer residential care so that children didn't have to leave the county, and then it kind of fell off the radar. Does anybody know about that?
Yeah, it's called Sorrel Leaf. And,
Sorrel Leaf.
Yeah,
okay.
they have the house, and they're working on construction at the moment, and it's between Arcata and Eureka, and it'll be, I don't know how many beds it'll be, but it'll be a crisis residential center that is something new for the county. And so, right now, if the youth is in crisis, they end up at our local emergency rooms, which puts a lot of stress on them. And then if they need additional support, they often have to go out of county to go to a hospital that specializes in psychiatric care. And so with this facility, hopefully we can keep some of those youth in.
Is there anything we can do to help it open sooner?
I don't know the opening date, but I know it's on track for...
It is.
I want to say within the year, but I could be wrong on that. However, Sorrel Leaf does have staff right now. They have some clinicians and case managers that we are working with that are already providing services in the community to youth that are experiencing mental health symptoms.
Great.
So,
Thanks very much.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it's sometime in 2024, mid-2024, last I heard.
Yeah,
and their mobile crisis team is up and running Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and that's the county, the law enforcement agencies, and I think CWS are all referral sources for that, and so they can send referrals to Sorrel Leaf's mobile response team. And they'll have 10 beds, I think.
10 beds, great.
Yeah.
Sounds right.
Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Marlene Hernandez. I am the program director with the START services here in Eureka. And I just wanted to address a few of the concerns that I heard earlier. But first, I wanted to just inform the community that we are actually working on establishing 2 enhanced behavioral support homes, one in Fortuna and one in McKinleyville. So we're working towards, again, supporting individuals with mental health needs and intellectual and developmental needs. So again, we work directly through the regional center, so we get referrals through them. But one of the things that we are in charge of doing is providing training to our community. And so Leah was touching on the fact that it would be super amazing if we could provide education or training to special ed teachers on IDD and like co-occurring mental health needs. And that's something that I am in charge of with my clinical director. And so I would really love to, kind of collaborate with a few of you maybe after this so that I can provide more information and start maybe a collaboration so we can focus on this. And I think it would be amazing to create support groups for teens, which is something else that we could probably team up with and do with schools specifically so that we can have that linkage there. And yes, thank you everyone for being here and your time.
Thank you. Do you want to tell us a little more about START? Kind of what services you provide with RCRC too?
Yes, of
Just because I know we've talked, but I know you're a new program and you have some excellent resources. So I'd love for folks to know about that as well.
Right now we have a component where we're trying to provide crisis support. However, recognizing that there are a lot of barriers in hiring talent in Humboldt County, we're only providing crisis support from 9 to 5. And so, again, we do a lot of systems work. We work with the schools, the families, and providing psychoeducation. Also, we have a coaching component, which includes creating interventions and supporting individuals with, anxiety and depression along with their IDD. And we consult on a weekly basis with the medical director, our psychiatrist, to help us analyze any medication questions or curiosities that we may have. So we go into supporting individuals and systems, again, with a curious mindset. We really want to identify what the pain associated with the symptomology is. And so sometimes addressing, complex needs, medications can help, but they're not always the way. And so we need more maybe grounding techniques to really help individuals kind of learn healthy coping strategies, and also trying to help individuals understand, and the systems involved understand, that we need to provide accommodations for some of our individuals, that behavior is not going to be modified or changed completely, but we can support and really understanding and building that compassionate lens.
Thank you. Yeah, START is through RCRC. So if you know a youth who is connected with RCRC and they need more crisis support, that might be something that they can make a connection with. RCRC is Redwood Coast Regional Center for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
So I just seen my son walk in, but I had an emergency come up yesterday that I'm going to leave after his presentation. But I made the commitment to be here because somebody tried to get me to leave earlier. I said, no, I committed to this. But I really want to thank you, Kim, for inviting me here, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, Virgil. We appreciate it. I have another question here, or are we ready for the presentation? Not yet? Okay. All right. So I got another question here. What resources are available locally for youth with cannabis or nicotine addiction, or not locally? I mean, I know there are a lot of national hotlines as well, but what is a good way to help refer them or talk with them about kind of getting them help?
I'll just mention our adolescent treatment program, the ATP. That's the main avenue with county mental health for services for youth for substance use issues. There's also, if they have their own health insurance or even, partnership health plan, they can call that number, and those services will hook you up with specific services for any kind of addiction. So, there's really an emphasis right now on what they call no wrong door. So, if you reach out through your health plan or through the county or through whatever agency, we're all trying to work together to connect you to the right service. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And are there ways to, in this, anyone is welcome to chime in. Are there ways to talk to youth about substance use that anyone has found particularly effective in getting traction and in helping them?
I would say that it's important to always build relationship and have that be a foundation, and creating a foundation of trust, that this child is really truly seen, and that there is kind of this unbreakable positive regard that we like them, and that nothing they're going to say is going to change that. And so once that has been established, and that, you're not going to be, as punitive. I think the real fear comes from this idea that there's going to be punishment, or that we're going to be labeling or determining that we're going to decide something about the worth of this human. And I think children are, and all of us are terrified about where we stand in the world and how we're going to be seen. And I think we all, especially the children in Humboldt County, we look out and we see the people that are in this unhoused population. We see people who are addicted to drugs, and I think there's this feeling of fragility that if any one of us makes a misstep, that there's a quick route to really being in crisis and not doing well. And some of our foster youth, like, it's not just somebody who's screaming outside on a street corner near a McDonald's with a bloodied face, but they're looking out those minivan windows, and that's their birth mother. And so I think, like, in general, our promise to our children needs to be a promise to ourselves and to the rest of our community that shows that that we're not allowing, that none of them are going to be allowed to slip through these like slacks in the floorboards, or that we talk about, or these gaps. And so I think a promise that we can make is by taking care of each other and taking care of our community members that are suffering, and it would instead serve as a promise that we're making that they will be taken care of. And so I would just say, just to lean as far away from being punitive and by labeling any child with some kind of character defect, when really, if we were interested in looking beyond the behavior, we're always going to see a source, and we're always going to find a scared little kid that deserves compassion.
Thank you.
So I work predominantly with the transient population, and what I see most often with the people with substance use disorders is that they started using between the ages of 12 and 15. But it was generational. It wasn't something that they just picked up out of the blue. They usually saw that being demonstrated, or it was offered to them by a parent, by a relative, by somebody close to them. And it became their escape from the life that they had to live. I think when we can reach children that are in those situations before they reach those ages is when we can make a difference, when we can create those bonds with them and teach them their value, teach them their worth, teach them that, one, they're worth fighting for, two, that they have a purpose in life. They have a purpose in life. Their parent had a perfect purpose in life as well, which I think a lot of times they hear that their parents were worthless, whatever those cases may be, but then they start to believe themselves that people can not have value. So maybe they don't have value if their mom or dad didn't have value. When we can teach them they have value and give them that hope for the future, I think it gives them more to fight for in order to be able to make that difference. Because once they've started using at that young age, it affects their development. The people that I'm working with on the streets, a lot of them behave like 15-year-old teenagers because that's where their brains stopped developing because they started using. I talked to a female yesterday who is 40 years old, and she told me she started using at 12 because her mom gave it to her. So when we're advocating for youth, we're talking about raising kids with resilience. And I always say, kids are resilient, but they shouldn't have to be. We want to teach them that resilience, but we also want to advocate for them before they get to the point where they have to be extremely resilient. Resilience is great. It's even better when they don't have to fight for those places in their life.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on that? All right. So I think we're going to switch things up. We're actually going to do a quick break, 10 minutes. And then when we come back, we'll have our presentation from Dr. Virgil Moorehead, Junior, Dr. Virgil Moorehead Jr. Our apologies. We had miscommunication in our planning team with this, and we've misadvertised and confused them, unfortunately. So our apologies.
I wasn't confused, but I kept telling Kim, no, you want my son. But anyway, so last week or a week before, so hey, so Junior, what are you doing on the 30th? He goes, I don't know. Somebody signed me up for this town hall meeting. I don't know what. Who? I said, well, they confused you, but can you come over? So.
Well, we graciously appreciate you both coming. So we'll take that 10-minute break. Let's come back at 2:45. We do have again food and refreshments down the hall, and we also have some wonderful folks tabling from DHHS and their Youth and Family Services department, as well as NAMI. And so please check out those booths, and we'll see you back in 10. We now have our presentation from Dr. Virgil Moorehead from Two Feathers Native American Family Services. Two Feathers is doing really great work in the community, and we're happy to have them here. So thank you, Dr. Moorehead.
Thank you for having me. I'm Virgil Jr., the executive director at Two Feathers. Can you hear me back there, Mario? All right. So I'm the executive director of Two Feathers, trained as a clinical psychologist, and so I'm sure my father gave a little bit of overview of the work that we've been doing at Two Feathers, but I'm going to give a little bit more sort of description overview of the work that we're doing with really what we're learning at Two Feathers as it relates to children's mental health, as it relates specifically to Native American youth mental health and wellness, because that's our focus at Two Feathers. So, I grew up in this larger community in the sense of Humboldt County. Went to McKinleyville High, then went to college and was gone for about 18 years, I think, and moved back about 5 years ago and was teaching a little bit at Humboldt, what was Humboldt State and Cal Poly Humboldt. And then started working at Two Feathers, and we had a staff of I think 4. Now we're at a staff over the last 5.5 years of 40. We're serving around 300 Native youth a year, whether it's in Fortuna, Hoopa, Klamath, McKinleyville, Arcata, Eureka, and so I feel like we've learned a lot at Two Feathers doing the mental health. At this moment, I think we have 18 social work / kind of marriage family therapists, so mental health therapists. We have 18 therapists that work at Two Feathers that serve about, I would say, 150 youth a week in mental health counseling. And I would say that it's more intensive mental health counseling. That's the goal. And so, what we found is to be able to reach the youth, to be able to reach them in meaningful ways, we have to go where they're at, and we have to adapt our services in very creative ways to keep them in services. And so we're in, I think, 11 or 12 schools. So, I think at Two Feathers, we're a big believer of school-based mental health services. We combine that with sort of cultural prevention work, like just fun activities, youth employment. But really, I think that, I think there's this, he's a pastor, sort of minister, out of LA. He does a prison rehabilitation program called Homeboy Industries. His name's Father Greg Boyle. And one of the things that Father Greg Boyle, I was listening to him because at Two Feathers we did a strategic plan to try to give us focus, what we're going to do over the next 3 years. And I was listening to Father Greg Boyle. And one of the things somebody asked him is like, what's your vision in 5 years, 3 years for Homeboy Industry? which is the largest prison rehabilitation program in the world. And he says, I don't know. I just take one step at a time. And so then he broke down what that means. And I think that in this description is what we really need to be focusing on in regards to our approach to youth mental health and what we've did over the last 5 years, I think, including the school-based mental health, is he said, I first started, I was riding a bicycle in the like barrio of East LA. He said, and I was just connecting with what he calls the homies. I was connecting with the homies. And then he said, man, I thought that they needed jobs. They needed jobs. So he started like what he's called Homeboy Cafe, where he put these folks that just got out of prison that were still on parole and gave them jobs. Then he's like, man, I started finding that they need education. So he started a school. Then he started saying, well, I think they need housing. He's worked and did housing. And then, more recently in the last maybe 5 years, he's like, there's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of healing that needs to happen. So I got counselors, Homeboy Industries, therapists, case managers, wraparound services. And so his point was, what's the strategic plan? It's based on the need. It's based on being deeply immersed in the community and constantly adapting to meet the needs of the community, whether it's school, whether it's education, housing, tattoo removals they do, giving them jobs, giving them housing. That's the approach. And I think that, as I heard Father Boyle, that's what I kind of reflected on at what we've been doing at Two Feathers. So when I say that, we're in the schools, 50% of our services are in Hoopa, in Eastern Humboldt, because, when I first moved back, we went and I drove around with this psychiatrist from Stanford, and we just listened. And we listened, and we talked to people, maybe like 12 to 20 people, community leaders. And one of the reoccurring things that was happening, that was being said, is we need counselors, therapists in the schools. So then, that's where I went. I went to Hoopa. That was my first real job, I think, up here when I moved back. But again, that's the philosophy of like Father Boyle. There's need there. So let's go make things happen. Not, sit in a county meeting and talk about it, right? Plan about it. Like Father Boyle was out on a bicycle in this bald white guy in the ghetto, and he built the relationships because really, like, it's listening in one step at a time. But it's also like, we work in Orleans, we work in Wetchpeck, we work in Hoopa, we're now in Lolita, because that ACLU report came out and they kept talking about we need to help the Lolita school. And, I told our staff, just get down there and do it. You know what I'm saying? Like, get it, because without the trust and respect of the community, you don't have mental health programs. You don't have kids coming to counseling, kids coming to cultural-based programs. You have to get in there, just like Father Boyle did, his bicycle. And then you have to have the approach of constantly trying to improve and get better and listen to the community. But you have to be in the community to be able to understand and what the needs are. And so that's kind of what, I think, like, people talk about, like, special sauce or special ingredients. And that's what I'm describing right now. Because, I would not be surprised if, we're seeing more Native kids in counseling and mental health services than any organization in the state of California, locally, here in Humboldt. this is what we're finding, right? We have a wonderful, clinical director who is a big reason for the 18 mental health clinicians there. But there's a philosophy to it. There's an approach to it. There's a reputation, a brand to it, and there's ingredients to it, I think. And so, and I think one of the things, those ingredients that is not what I've already said, is that's important for us as community leaders, for us working in the community, for us standing up for children's mental health, is that you can have the fanciest you could have the fanciest program, you could have the fanciest curriculum, you could have the fanciest academic, you could have the fanciest buildings, you could have a bunch of money. That's not what's going to drive outcomes. What's going to drive outcomes in children's mental health is the people. Programs don't change people. People change people. And so what we're finding at Two Feathers is that we're part of that special sauce, or that ingredients, I think, too, is finding the right people. That, I was just, we have some evaluators in town. I was talking about one of our mental health clinicians, and we have a young man that, we've worked with, he's in, they picked him up in jail right when he turned 18. He's been there for 3 years. This clinician was seeing him before he went into jail. He got to, and when he was in, before he went to jail, the adult jail, he was in juvenile, and then they let him out, but he was seeing him virtually in juvenile hall, and then in jail. I think they let him see him in person or virtually sometime, and then they're like, no. So now what he does is he sees him on the phone in visitation hours. But I use this clinician as an example because he also has some of the best outcomes out of all of our clinicians. It's not it's not the theory, it's not the approach, it's the person. And so us as a community, how do we create strategies? How do we create approaches to identify folks in the communities, leaders? How do we fund jobs so that we can get the best talent where there's the most need? Because there will be big impact if we have that. There's impact based on the quality of the person. And within psychotherapy research, that is fully supported. That more than the theory, it's the person. Because, I guess the third thing that I'll say, besides Father Boyle and that approach of getting proximate, constantly iterating the quality of the person, is that I'm sure that people have said this before I got here, is the importance of thinking about this long term. There's the Midwest Native folks. They talk about 7 generations. It's going to take 7 generations to heal what's happened within Native communities and stuff. Well, as a mental health field, working with children, we have to think long term. We have to keep folks in the feet. This clinician, we're trying to keep in this work. Because it takes more than just 6 sessions. It takes more than just 1 month. We have to think long term. So prevention-based services, it's just, amazing to me that the some of the leadership at the state level who are pro mental health, the one of the best governors for the mental health, how you taking money from prevention into crisis services? Prevention, long term, thinking about it long term, that's what's going to take. Because for us as Native communities, this stuff has been going on for 150 years. To think that 6 sessions is going to heal and rebuild our community is naive at best. And so, that the importance of finding funding and putting in programs and putting in leadership that think about it in that way. That think about long-term work. Because, at Two Feathers, we're not, I think, in the business to just put Band-Aids on folks. Like, we're in the business of creating community-minded folks, the ways that we can impact their character so that they, become the next mayor, or they become the next person that is a community organizer, the next Betty Chin. They become people that are thinking about the community. But that takes work. That takes long-term perspective. That takes like positive youth development kind of work. That takes, working with the teachers, doing that sort of wraparound kind of programming so that we can impact and have healthy people equals healthy communities, right? Like, how do we as a community help to create healthy folks? Because we're coming up against, I know Mr. Fernandez would be on the same page. Like, we're dealing with materialism, consumerism, individualism. Like, how do we, when we're talking about children's mental health, be in the profession of impacting character development? I think it's too short-sighted to just say, okay, we're going to reduce the anxiety and the depression. No. Yes, we're going to do that. But what does it matter if you reduce the anxiety of a young person that are beating up their girlfriend? Like, well, okay, we got the panic attacks, but what about beating up their girlfriend? Like, so we have to, as mental health field and just working with children, think about that and create programs that take that in. It's not either or, take that into consideration. So I think, that's the kind of, I think, three things that, just to sort of summarize, I think what, I'm talking about is, the importance of getting deep within the community. The Father Boyle example. There's another person that there's a movie, HBO, his name's Brian Stevenson. He's a lawyer, but he went to death row and worked with African-American men and represented them, Harvard trained. And one of the things that he says is you have to get proximate. You have to get proximate. And what he means is, like I said with Father Boyle, you have to be deep within the community. You got to get out of the office. Like, because then you're going to learn and you're going to figure out, like, what are the needs? How can we adapt and create youth mental health programs that kids will actually show up to, right? So that first point, like, I worked in multiple Native organizations before I came back, and I'm like, where's all the kids? Millions and millions of dollars. Where's the kids? How are you going to impact the kids in the community if you don't got kids? Well, how are you going to get the kids if you don't get to know them and figure out how you can engage them? So we got to get proximate, right? And then the second point, I think, in thinking about mental health and children's mental health in this county is the power of the person. The power of that programs don't change people as much as people change people. So how do we, within our schools, within our universities, within all this, getting more mentors, getting more healthy coaches, getting more supporting teachers? Because, teachers, if supported, like, imagine the rock star teachers, the ripple effect that they've had in our community. But it's the quality of the person. So how are we developing quality people? And that gets back to the third point, right? Which is that prevention long-term work, right? That we should all be, as a community, working together to create the next Father Boyle or the next Brian Stevenson or Mother Teresa, whoever, like that sort of work. Like, because you have to be healthy to be able to, as I see it, to think about other people. Like 30 to 40% of my job as executive director, it's got a little better recently, is working within interpersonal chaos, right? Like trauma. Because a lot of folks that go in this work have experienced stuff, right? So how are we reversing that? Because imagine what more we can get done if we're working together, if we're not, having the big ego or getting threatened by each other and and trying to one up people or thinking us versus them, right? You know, when we work up in the Hoopa schools, that's what the superintendent said, the board, we got to get out of this us versus them. When I talk with Connie Beck in Department of Health and Human Services, we work together. There's enough to go around. There's enough need. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, and so, but how do we help to create healthy folks? Because those healthy folks are like that mental health clinician that I talked about. And I know that he has at least 15 young men where I think he's had a life-altering impact on their lives. Now, they may not become the next Brian Stevenson, but maybe they become a good father. Maybe they become a good partner, a good friend. You know, that's that character piece, right? And so, but that from a mental health sort of language is prevention, early intervention kind of work. Like it's like 5% the funding or something silly, the funding for mental health, and you know the Mental Health Service Act and all that money, the marijuana tax money, millionaire tax money. Like it's like 5%. I don't quote me there, but it's not as much as it should be. Is the point that for prevention and long-term work, and so. Those sort of 3 points is kind of what I wanted to share about, you know, because I think those are how, you know, we're thinking at Two Feathers, right? That we're going to continue to, you know, I think my father talked about, you know, we've purchased some houses, but that comes from that same philosophy of Father Boyle is these young people, when they're graduating that we're working with, they're often experiencing multiple stressors, multiple adverse childhood experiences, that transition from 18, like, and then because we're able to track those vulnerable, more at-risk kids through the schools, but when they graduate, it's really hard to track them down, and so that's the idea about the supportive housing, putting folks in the housing and providing those supportive services. But again, it's back to being in the arena, being in the work and learning and saying, well, why don't we try this? Why don't we try this? You know, and just having that mindset of disruption, of innovation, because obviously, you know, we've had a mental health field for I don't know how many years, but who continues to struggle? It's not rocket science. Like there's the same statistics. Native Americans, those that are on the lower socioeconomic, like, so we have to have that disruption, that sort of trying to go against the status quo. And so those three points that I talked about is, I think, our way of trying to go about that. You know, I guess one last thing would be just the importance of in the community. I think one of the things that we're also finding is developing like managers and leaders. I think that but that gets back to that character development stuff. But like, that's the one thing, a lot of like our 18 mental health clinicians, if we had managers, I think we would be even a bit more scalable. So how are we as a community, you know, getting more involved in, you know, project management, people management, you know, team, you know, borrowing stuff from sports in the sense of team culture and stuff, like, you know, that's how I think, because then we get more talent. So I would say that would be the last thing. All right, I don't know how long I went, but I was just free flowing.
It was perfect. Thank you. How about a round of applause? Dr. Moorehead, thank you so much for your time and for coming. That was just excellent. I know that you're short of time. You mentioned that you might be able to take a few questions. Does anyone have any questions specifically for Dr. Moorehead before he has to take off? Or the panel, any responses or questions to that? Do you want to come up and speak into the microphone? Sorry. Otherwise, Zoom can't hear you.
They don't keep score,
Okay.
but I think they did.
I don't know where this buzz.
It's on.
Do you use community workers in your work?
Yeah, I think yes, we do. I think one of the things that I didn't say, but people have been asking. I think that one of the things like where I have a unique voice, and that helps to get things done within the community, is that a lot of the youth and kids that we work with, that's who I hung out with and grew up in. Like when I was 16, 17, I was cleaning juvenile hall because I got in trouble. All my friends were getting kicked out of high school. I was, this close to being kicked out of high school. And so I had that lived experience and then went and got, the doctorate. So that combination of lived experience and being able to navigate the sort of mental health field and just the professional kind of world is so important. And so to your question, as an example, I think that it's really a balance. It's yes, we're trying to develop the community. There's a peer support workers. They're called peer support specialists. And you can get credentialed and have lived experience. You don't need the degree, and then you can bill for Medi-Cal. It's something that we're building out. But we have about 7 or 8 staff right now that are from the community, a big part of the community, and that we're going to work towards getting them as peer support specialists. So yes, it's a big part of our model, but it's not just our model. It's a combination with the mental health clinicians that often aren't from the community, licensed, not licensed, and then we have about a quarter of our staff that are from the community. I mean, we don't use the word that you're asking, like what is it? Community what?
Workers.
Yeah, we call them cultural mentors, cultural advocates, but if we're gonna get to where they're called peer support specialists, and because that will help to be sustainable in the sense of being able to build Medi-Cal. Did that answer your question?
Sort of. I ran the first youth clinic in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
It was in the Latino community, and at first didn't go so good because I don't look very Latino. But eventually they understood that I was with them, not against them. I was for them. And we were working together. But the community workers were the kids that we were serving. 2 of them became the community workers, so the kids listened to them.
Yeah.
And they got so much further than anybody else. But they came to me and said, what do we do? So then I waited for that. So then I could tell them what to, the kinds of knowledge they needed to give. And it was so exciting because we worked till midnight. We stood on street corners. We ran the clinic. We had thousands of people going through that. People went, where is all these people coming from? We had fathers and mothers and their babies getting shots all the way around the clinic and down the street at 10 o'clock at night, during the week when they're supposed to go to work the next day. But what you're right, it was the people versus doing for the people. They did for themselves. But at the same time, I found a youth clinic, a drug clinic got attached to us, which I wasn't real happy because they were older people. But their counselors were former addicts, but they weren't being protected in the fact that they became their clients and they went back to drugs, some of them.
Yeah.
Because when you give a peer counselor or community worker that responsibility, to reach out, they need a whole lot of support because sometimes, they're on the brink of not feeling like they know what they're doing or whatever when they're doing great things.
Yeah.
And so we have to protect them or they end up going by the wayside, not. And at 18, you keep saying the age about 18 and stuff. 18 is when, if you look in research, you get the chemicals for decision making. And you're a different person than you are at 17. I used to teach car crash stuff. And I encourage the kids to wait till 18 because all of a sudden the car drives a whole different way. And at the same time, their lives drive a whole different way. People change in crisis. Crisis can be a good thing. But at the same time, at 18, they get a chemical setup that they haven't had before. It's been well researched. And so they can make better decisions, and you find things can really go up
It can be almost refreshing
Yep.
because all of a sudden they start seeing the world differently, even with mental illness or behavioral illness, whichever they have.
Yep.
Anyway, thanks for your talk. I couldn't agree more with you.
Thank you. Any other questions or thoughts?
Hey, Virgil.
Hey.
It's good to see you.
Yep.
I had the luxury, and I see it as such, to work for you all a few months ago for a few months at a time, and well, there's a bit of a bias here. So I think you all run a fantastic program internally. You know, the peer-to-peer support that you offer, the project management, and the community outreach you all do, especially in that part of Humboldt. It's fantastic, and not one size fits all, but to have that type of trust and involvement and those ties to the community, how would you emulate something like that particularly? And I don't know if anybody here can speak to it, but as Eureka City Schools is getting ready to fold out their community schools program, how would you emulate something like that?
Yeah. Well, I think it's. I think the importance of, the leadership and the people and those teachings about, it was like there was something last night at the McKinleyville Middle School, and the parking lot was full, and I text my partner. I was like, "What's going on over there?" And they're like, and then she texts me back a flyer of a community movie night with dinner. And I was like, that's pretty cool. Because, and then I was talking with our partnership director at Two Feathers. I said, what that does, that was cool. Plumb full. We have, I think, with community school grants and different, funding sources, there's money to put on stuff like that. And I think that community building, those positive events, I have, 4 kids at home, parenting, it's hard, to do work, so how do we create more community within the schools of doing stuff like that movie night, because it was for Morris, the elementary. So that makes I would guess, it has the parents and kids look forward to something. It has the teachers maybe feel proud to be part of Morris, turnover and all that. We got to work on that turnover. If we're having a thriving school, a thriving community, I would guess there's going to be less turnover. So just being really intentional on the community building, and then the food, but you got to think, how do you get the kids there? Just like I said, the kids want to see a movie and food. If you get babysitting too, dinner's
taken care of.
Yeah, dinner's taken care of. Something to do, that community building. I think in and outside of school, but we have to be really intentional on what we can't just blame the parents or blame if they don't show up. We have to be disciplined and focused and get that feedback, because it's possible they're showing up, especially post-COVID. So anything and everything that's building community, that's inviting the sheriff's office, inviting the highway patrolman, inviting the fire, inviting having booths there, and being really intentional on building community. I think just as much as there's healthy people equal healthy community, the more there's a sense of community, the more trust there is, the more vibrancy within the schools. I think that's how we're going to be more successful. So, fun activities, but that are not just a one-time thing. That gets back to that program management and the management. It has to be, measured and really intentional. But again, we have to be creative too. But I think that Morris movie night is an example, of creating community.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Anyone else?
First, I want to thank you for your talk. So many really poignant ideas that you shared. You mentioned prevention, and I just really want to bring up to our community how important not just prevention is, but promotion of mental health, and how critical the nature of infancy and pregnancy is. And we often forget that, because when we start to see children have problems is when we start to put them in social settings. But the roots of regulation, the roots of empathy, start in the first 6 months of life and in pregnancy. And so, really as a community, if we're wanting to think about long-term 7-year cycles, how we're going to stop this, we've got to think about our pregnant families, and we've got to think about our babies, and we've got to get in there as soon as possible so that they have a regulated brain, right? Because that happens in the beginning. Babies are born, really ready to become a part of the environment they're born into. And so their brains are taking statistics on the world around them, and they're becoming, okay, I'm in a world where my parent hears me cry and they respond to me. I can trust other people. And my brain is wiring to trust other people. If I'm born into a family where my needs aren't met and I'm not learned to regulate, no one rocks me, no one holds me, no one pats me on the back, no one changed my diaper when I need it, I learn that the world isn't a safe place. And that happens really, really early in that part of the brain that is harder to change as kids get older. So we see these kids come into school that can't regulate, but that happened in the first 6 months of life. In pregnancy, that happened. And, I feel like we're missing the boat, and we really got to think earlier. Not that every point isn't important. Our teenagers are important because they're the ones that are going to have the babies. But we have to be thinking about all aspects of this. And I think as a community, we really need to come together for our pregnant families and our babies, so that babies are born with a better chance of that promoting mental health. So we're not even having to think about, that regulation not being intact for them, and how, if there are challenges in the family, that we can do that prevention. It's less costly for our community. Our outcomes, maybe we won't have to wait 7 years for the change to be happening if we're really investing as early as possible for our babies. So I really appreciate what you said. I think as communities, we often forget how important this period of time is, because babies don't have voices, and babies aren't in school settings where we're spending a lot of money to try and do intervention that's really past the point of where we need to be starting. So I just want to encourage us as a community to do something different and think about our babies and our pregnant families. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. Well, Dr. Moorehead, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. I think Mayor Virgil has something for you on your way out. All right. I'd also like to take this minute just to announce too, if you are part of an organization and are wanting to share your contact information with us, we can link that to the town hall page. And so if you just want to come up and give your contact information to Cozy, she can help kind of make those connections, and that way we can do some networking while we're all doing this. At this point, I'd like to invite, well, I guess actually check in with the town hall or the panel first. Does anyone have any follow-up or any thoughts on what Dr. Moorehead was talking about?
I mean, there was so many great points there. It's really inspirational. And I just want to echo, just in terms of the relationship issues, one of the things that's exciting for me be here today is just listening to all the great ideas and from the community, and that's where these solutions come from. In our county clinical work, we have a thing called child and family team meetings, and the idea behind that is if you can get together all the people, all the professionals, and all the natural supports in a youth's life, and it could be the teacher, it could be somebody who lives next door. You can make better decisions for that person and give them better services that are better coordinated. They're not siloed. Everybody's talking to each other. So the child and family team is really a central part of a lot of the services that we do. And just to put out there, if you're someone who knows a youth or someone, maybe you could be on a child and family team, and maybe you could, help advocate for that youth or that family. And I think, to Virgil's point about relationship, like if you know a youth, they're going to listen to you more than some of the professionals that we bring into their lives. It can be really hard to build rapport to a stranger who's coming in trying to, tell a youth what to do or something. So, if you have that influence, it's so powerful, and we need people in the community to step forward and be part of those teams. And also I was, we were talking a little bit, and just the power of becoming a foster parent or opening up your home to a youth that's in need. You give a really inspirational talk about that, but that's just such a big need in our community, foster parents, respite for other foster homes, things like that. So thank you.
I'd say, yeah, I love the point about infancy being so important. And it always seemed kind of backwards to me that we have professors with doctorates teaching college students who could probably take an online course and figure it out themselves. But we're not always spending that much attention and time and bringing all of our expert knowledge and our experience as people to that early first five, kind of world. And so that focus on infancy is so important. And I think it's important for us to look at ourselves with grace and that acknowledgement of parenting being hard. It was just so beautiful just to hear that said out loud, and to try and remove some of the stigma we have around struggling during that time because of how hard and how that the challenges of parenting just force you to face yourself, and you have a vulnerable being that's completely dependent on you, and it's something that you can't turn away from or run away from, and so you're really forced to confront yourself. And there's been issues, in my own life that keyed in to that when I'm in survival mode, or when I'm stressed, or when I'm, in a fear state, or my nervous system is not regulated, my ability to attend to a child decreases greatly. And when I'm in pain, or, like physically dealing with illness, that just compounds. And so that early mental and, development and stuff happens when, and emotionally intelligent children happen when we're able to fully attend to them and sit and bear witness to their pain, and to find what they find important, for those moments. And it's now a fight between our child and our devices that we're attending to, and the scrolling that we've now substituted for other self-soothing tactics that we used to have. And our own children are finding themselves, spending just a huge amount of their experiential life is engaging with these technologies. And so when we talk about children, some of the things that they talk about as being the biggest issues for anxiety and depression in youth is this feeling of this huge amount of pressure to achieve and to do well, and we can do that by meeting them with compassion and being present with them, as much as possible, and celebrating them as individuals. And then another big issue is all this screen time, and it's kind of a difference between what their lived reality is and what they're seeing online as what they might expect their life to be. And we're watching pictures of people living these fantastical lives on social media that are highly edited and curated to show, a slice of reality, but are we really reflecting, to them a realistic, beautiful path that they can take to become a powerful person that has impact in the world. And we can do that, in part by crowding out. I've heard the term crowding out that time that they spend on devices by filling it with all those beautiful community activities and movie nights and all that kind of stuff. So just becoming just deeply immersed with each other would be great. And then lack of adequate sleep is something that that new parents are facing, but also teenagers and youth. And so finding a way to prioritize that and put systems in place, or just even having that be something that's valued in our society to a really big level, because the effect that lack of sleep has on our youth, who need more of that than even our adults and stuff, is hugely detrimental. So I just want to put those points in there. But we can attend to those by how we structure our families, and really we have to see ourselves in a kind, compassionate light to be able to understand, what needs we have to fill before we can meet those needs of the children in our care. And so if we can remove some of our own shame and step away from some of that fear and scarcity and stuff, and be able to bravely share our stories with each other and with our larger community and stuff, then I think we'll find a lot more commonality in what we're experiencing here. And we're going to be able to come up with some really exciting solutions. Because every single thing that I've heard that's presented as a solution here is basically filled with fun, beautiful activities and connecting with each other and spending more time in nature and, literacy and reading. And that seems like a pretty exciting path to have a direction towards. So I was like, thank you.
So touching on the community events, everybody here is here because they care about youth. We have so many youth that don't have somebody that cares about them. We have these community events. You have the activities within schools. Who are the kids that aren't coming? Those are the ones that we need to be focusing on. You might have your kids, you're bringing your kids to these events. Do they have a classmate that doesn't have somebody to bring them to these events? Do you notice those kids that are isolated? Those are maybe the kids that you need to go, can I take your kid with me to this thing? Most of the time the parents won't even care because they just want a break from the kid. But if you can take on even an extra hour for one of these youth that are at risk, you're taking that opportunity to build a bond with somebody who needs it, who needs to be able to be included, and they may have never been included. So I would just encourage everybody that's here or listening that's maybe something you consider doing as well, because you guys already care about the kids. So just finding those ones that need that.
Thank you. I'd also just like to let the folks on Zoom know that Zoom questions aren't going to be answered. We don't do questions from Zoom just because there's links between anonymity and increased toxicity, and we're trying to keep the environment safe here for questions. And so if you do have a question and you would like that, feel free to send it to our town hall email. That's townhall@eurekaca.gov. And we can grab that and screen it and then ask that question to the panel. So if you have questions on Zoom, that's your avenue. Sorry that we don't have a easier route, but we want to prioritize keeping the safe environment. Anyone from the audience here have questions for the panel? Can kind of resume that process now. Want to come on up to the microphone? Thank you.
I just wanted to confirm what Beth Hevelin was talking about and share an idea that my youngest daughter's friend did. She started a crisis nursery in Spokane, Washington, and mothers who were at their wits' end could come and leave their young children there. And I think in terms of dealing with, supporting parents, and I see a lot of single parents who are completely wiped out and in what you call survival mode. And so they can't attune. And because they can't attune, the children don't have self-regulation skills because they're not soothed themselves. And this crisis nursery saved a lot of lives, I think. So I would like to throw that out for anyone who's into community development, that it was very, very effective. And as an individual, our family has helped a lot of single parents, and they are neglected pretty much, often stigmatized. And these are the people who then have children who become problems later. So I just wanted to, confirm, Beth. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. Anyone else with questions? If not, we can go to cards. All right. So this one is for Officer Jayme Clark. What is that word? Sorry, reading difficulties here.
What are the types of calls?
Oh. What are the types of calls you respond to involving youth, and how do you work towards positive outcomes with those youth?
So I respond to multiple different calls for youth. I was asked recently how many calls this year, or how many youth I've worked with this year, which got me thinking that I've probably worked with dozens of youth at this point, ranging from newborn to teens. I will respond to calls for kids in crisis. Some of them are behavioral crisis, some of them are mental health crisis. And then I also respond to, I've gone to calls where kids are living in far less than ideal circumstances, kids in encampments, kids who are possibly being neglected in motel rooms. So I respond to a lot of different types. What was the other part of that?
How do you work towards positive outcomes with those youth?
So it's going to depend on what the calls are. The kids who are experiencing a behavioral crisis, a lot of it, as well as a mental health crisis, a lot of it's going to be sitting and listening with them. I had a youth recently who was just having a major anxiety attack. There's not one right answer for each person. There's not one blanket solution for each call that I go to. But for this youth, I sat next to him. And they just talked and talked and talked and talked. That was it. They were having a hard time breathing. They were having a hard time with everything going on in their life. Everything felt too big and too overwhelming. And I sat and listened. I sat with this person for an hour. That was it. It wasn't to say that they didn't have a stable home that they were going to go home to. None of that mattered at that moment. At that moment, what that youth needed was to be heard. We as adults all like to be heard, and a lot of times the kids, with the things they're feeling, they don't have their voices heard. They're either being told that they're too emotional, or it doesn't matter what they have to say because we're too busy to hear it. And when we can sit and listen, we're going to learn a lot of things about what that kid needs. So taking the time, and all of the calls I respond to with youth take a lot of time. I can be on scene from, sometimes it's a quick resolution, but normally it's a minimum of an hour with that person. Maybe we're going for a walk. I went with the school resource officer recently to a kid having a behavioral crisis. We took a nature walk. Not ideal, my legs hurt, and it was muddy, and there were mosquitoes, but we did. We took a nature walk. That's what that kid needed at that moment. Some of it's been getting families the intervention they need from CWS. CWS offers a lot of supports to support keeping kids with their families. So getting those families connected and sitting with CWS and with the family. I've attended family team meetings with CWS and the families, because if we can all wrap around, I'm a cop. My job a lot of times requires enforcing the law, but sometimes when I can intervene before it gets to that point, it's going to make a big difference for them. So yeah, there's multiple different ways that I respond to them, and each one has been different, and I never know what the next one is going to be, and I never know if it's going to be multiple times that I'm going to visit the same youth, and maybe I'm not going to see any bit of difference. But what I do know with each child that I contact is that each child I contact in that moment gets to know they matter, somebody is advocating for them, they are loved in that moment and they are important. If that is the only time they ever feel that, that's horrible. But I would not change being able to do that for anything, because that moment, they know that they have value in society. That builds resiliency. At the end of that, if they remember, maybe they're 18, 20 years old, and they remember that cop cared about me. Maybe there's somebody who cares about me. Maybe I am worth something to someone. One of my foster youth reached out to me recently over Facebook, and he had been 10 years old when I got him, and he left. He was about 12. He was a very, very challenging, very violent child. And he contacted me, and he said, I want to thank you for making me feel loved. You made me feel like I mattered for that period of time. And that was both for me and my ex. So we gave him 2 years of feeling like he mattered in society. And now he's a productive member of society. But those were the 2 years that he had. And it was the people, his therapists that worked with him, his CASA worker that worked with him, the social worker that cared enough who wants to work with a kid who's going to chase somebody around with a bat at 10 years old? But that's a 10-year-old kid that's saying, I don't know how to function here. I just need somebody to love me. So each child you come across, and each child I come across, I just address it however it's going to need to be addressed at that moment.
Thank you. Any follow-up thoughts to that as far as intervening with children in crisis? What's important about that, or tactics that have been successful?
Just the, fostering challenging youth is, a huge need in our community. And being able to give them that attention and time and stick with them is just so important to their healing. A lot of these youth kind of go from home to home to home because their behaviors are so challenging. We do our part as a county to try to get, behavior folks inside the home and do those things. But I think having, the loving parenting and the foster parenting is just where it's all about. So it's great. Thank you for that story about that.
All right. Did you have something you want to say?
Yeah, I think this idea that the behaviors are so difficult is something that seems like a barrier, because it is, a reflection of what our own capacity is. And we need to look at what our capacity is, and we need to look at innovative, creative, exciting ways that we can expand that capacity, so that when a child does enter our community, that they are able to be welcomed not just by their family, but by a community that is excited for them to exist and feels like the world is a better place with them in it. And when we think about, the crux of this issue is that we have an increase in mental health issues in our youth, and we have children who are deciding to take their own lives. And I think we really need to question any time that we believe that tough love is necessary when we're talking about children. And then we can expand the conversation to include all of us if we could. But if we at least, especially when we're focusing on our youth and our children, is this idea that tough love is necessary, or if that we're working with a child that has an attitude problem, that's not. And I've seen, in child welfare and my involvement with that, I've seen children as young as 4 or 5 years old start to be labeled as bad kids, or they're dangerous, or they're liars. And you're talking about a terrified 4-year-old who we now have somebody saying, that's interacted with them, calling them evil even. And I think we need to take a huge step back and look at the language that we're using to describe, like even when we're in crisis, and we're anxious, but the language that we use to describe these children to them and in context just around them in this work is super important. And the last thing we want to do is for a child's last experience to be tough love. And at the end of the day, most of what they experienced during their time here on earth was very tough and not very loving. And so I think our ability to just expand our compassion to the most difficult of us, and instead of putting on kind of blinders as we drive down Broadway and trying to ignore, the people on the street and stuff that are in crisis and stuff, if we are able to resist the urge to dehumanize and understand that that we ourselves and these children are, like, I think just one misstep, one medical diagnosis, one mental illness challenge, one trauma away from that slippery slope. And I think that's what's causing a lot of fear and a lot of sense of scarcity and a lot of anxiety in our youth and in our population, is this idea that that is possible. And so our continued fight to create programs that can create kind of a catch-all for all of us is going to be really vital for us to move forward into a future where children believe that they're going to be taken care of. And so, yeah.
Thank you. Have a question here too. Has anyone on the panel seen an increase in Humboldt County's foster and homeless youth over the last 5 years?
I've seen an increase over the past 6 to 8 months, maybe a year, with an increase of families who are homeless. I've come across more kids than really should be living out of cars, living in tents, living in those situations, and a lot of them are newer to being transient.
Are there services that anyone's aware of that can help in those situations?
So there's Betty Chins. She oftentimes will have room if you call and ask. There's also the women's family shelter located in Old Town that will have rooms. CWS is actually a great resource for that because they do like to keep families together. I came across a younger mom who was living in a tent that just couldn't figure out how to get out of it. She wasn't somebody who abused substances. She just didn't know how to make a step from being homeless into being housed. I got her connected with CWS, who helped her along the way with the process of getting into housing. And they have more funding than a lot of other organizations, so sometimes they can do that quicker than anybody else. And they're not gonna just let a baby be sleeping in a tent at this point. So they were able to get her into a motel room for about a week before they were able to transition into a different type of housing for her. And she's been extremely successful in that.
Yeah, and I would echo the child welfare. I know a lot of people are reticent to make that call if you're in a family, but they do have a lot of resources to support families. Also, children's behavioral health. If they're with a family with children, a lot of our services serve the adults in that family too. We have case managers that will help, like, look for housing and help them fill out applications and do some of these things with the parents of those children. And we can bill for all that under Medi-Cal to support the family in that way. So families like that are in crisis, those are ones that we want to talk to and get in touch with them and see what we can do. We also have parent partners who are peers who establish a peer relationship, who have lived experience with working through child welfare and other systems, so they can really work with the parents to lift up their voices and help them get the services they need. So, yeah.
Thank you. Anyone from the audience have any questions? Just doing a check-in. If you have them, just come up and get in line, and then I can just get you when we have a break there.
All right, thank you. Lisa Clausen, Director of Student Services for Eureka City Schools. I'm also a resident, also a parent of 3 children here in our city. Eureka City Schools is committed to mental health. In our strategic plan number 3, mental health, social emotional wellness, and student decision making is our 3rd area, behind reading and math. That's huge. To have an organization, we are the We're the largest district out of 31 in our county. Recently awarded a $5.5 million school-based mental health grant that Mayor Virgil was talking about earlier. That allowed us to hire 4 social workers who are in our schools right now. We also hired 2 school psychologists because we heard from our families, we heard from our schools that middle school was not covered. And so we committed to covering our middle schools with a full-time school psychologist. Community schools, we talked about that earlier kind of briefly. We recently, and Dr. Moorehead talked about money not being it at all, but money really drives a lot of these programs. We have $12 million in community schools grants, and it's huge. And that piece of that community schools grant is the opening of wellness centers. It's having social workers on campuses. It hired 17 staff members to directly make connections with kids. And that is the goal of community schools, is people, place, and purpose. And we have to talk about people. We have to talk about a place that is safe for them and a purpose. The other pieces too is training our we have a trained social worker in our Marshall Family Resource Center. So we talk about resource centers in our community, linking families up who are in crisis. We add an additional nurse in our school because so many of our students are coming with much bigger things than needing an ice pack or a Band-Aid. We had to create a robust referral process that allows for students to access more resources. So it is beyond just needing reading intervention right now. These families need linkages. We need mental health support and counseling. The county does not offer a therapeutic support class for students who are TK through 6th grade. And that is what we did. We opened up a therapeutic support class because we heard the demands in our area. We have 5, 6, 7-year-olds who are in crisis, and school is hard for them. We have over 60 staff members in Eureka City Schools directly supporting mental health right now and behavior. We work closely with Officer Clark and the team. We letting you all know that education and related mental health services, which is the highest level of mental health services we can provide in the schools, Eureka City Schools will take that over in a year from the county because we believe that our students need to be served within our school district, and we are lucky enough to be able to have the resources to be able to do that. Wanted to also share about Bridges. So for Bridges, for everybody to know, is sunsetting this year. That means Bridges will not be here next year. This is going to be a huge issue in our community because we all say, let's make a Bridges referral, let's make a Bridges referral. It is not going to be here. And so they have a sustainability coordinator that is we need to work on it. We need to bring it going. It needs to go further than June of 2024. And so I think that's something that we need to talk about, and we need to look forward, and we need to create a plan. Lastly, listening sessions. One of I can't remember who said it, but one of the important parts is listening to our families and link it. Maybe it was Laura. We talked about really understanding what families want and building relationships. And so through our community schools, we are offering Saturday events. And so that's going to give our families an opportunity to come back on campus because that is what they told us. We held our listening session, our first one at Alice Burney Elementary School, and our families want to come back on campus. They want to be there on a Saturday. And that is a huge thing for families to say, you know what, I want to be there on the 6th day. Our kids just want to play on playgrounds. Our kids want to ride their bikes on the playground. Our kids want gymnastics and dance class. They want fun events. And I appreciate Officer Clark saying, grab another kid and come take them with you, because there are so many of our kids who are missing out on these events. And so I want you all to know that Eureka City Schools is committed to this, and it's such a driving force and a main part of what we're doing here for our community. So thank you.
Thank you. So we are getting an email from Zoom that what is the reason for bridges closing? And my understanding is that's the grant is sunsetting, correct?
Yeah, and I wish I could speak to that. You have the wrong program manager here, so I don't know all the ins and outs of the grant. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, but I can get that information if somebody wants to. If you want to
Yeah,
forward me the email.
Yeah, we can do that, and then we can
Yeah.
maybe we can post that information on the talk follow up.
Yep.
Anyone else from the audience have any questions?
Can I comment on what Lisa
Certainly
had to say? So she was talking about school being hard for 5, 6, 7-year-olds, and I think what's important for everybody to understand is from birth to the time the kids are in school, there's nothing there they can even. There's no services there if the parents don't access it. So unless law enforcement is being called or there's somebody else that sees something and advocates for these kids have already fallen through the cracks. At home, they may not be getting fed. They may not be getting bathed. They may not have clean clothes. They might not have a safe home environment to live in. And suddenly they're thrust into society. For lack of a better word, they're having to learn a whole social environment that's brand new to them, and they have a hard time adjusting. So that's a challenging thing for everybody, because when these kids aren't being seen up until that age, how do we intervene for them before that point, which is something we all need to be looking at as well.
Thank you. So another question on note card here. It appears many service organizations for youth operate between 9 to 5 when local data shows that crises occur most often from 10 to 10. What is the challenge to meeting that need and expanding crisis services or mobile services?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We were just having a conversation with a lot of our clinicians, and they were, talking about how, some of them would like to work more 410s and different hours to do some of that. And I think, as a large bureaucracy, I think the county's been a little slow at kind of having those options available. But I think it is starting to happen within our programs that we're looking at ways that we can be open during the evening time in the clinic and have the staff that we need to do that and serve people who can only come then. So I think some of it's bureaucratic challenges, at least for our programs, but also just, finding staff that want to do those hours too can be challenging. We have a hard time finding staff to work regular hours. So having staff, sign up to work a weekend, things like that. Our children's mobile response is basically 8 to 5, where we have a clinician and a manager or supervisor on staff. And then after that, the kind of adult side of mobile response takes over. And we work obviously closely with them, but we don't have a full-time children's mobile response team that's there 24 hours. We do have some staffing on the weekends sometimes, but not all the time. So we have some staffing issues there. Yeah, it's a challenge.
Well, and I know staffing in general, if I just speak from my position with care, staffing is difficult for mental health across the state and across the nation too. That's a huge shortage. And I forget who it was, but someone was talking earlier about really investing and trying to develop more staff in the mental health field. And that's a super important piece, and developing programs that can help train and adequately train those staff members and set them up so that they can have success out in the field. That helps agencies like DHHS and Crisis Alternative Response of Eureka and all these other agencies that are doing mental health services really be able to expand their services, because we can have great plans and we can even have money, but if we don't have the people to implement it, we never get traction. So that's a big piece of that, I think. Mm-hmm. Any other questions from the audience? All right, look through some of these. There's a question, I was looking for it, and maybe I put it aside already. There's another one that was asking some questions about CWS and asking, if is reunification, I guess, effectively, what are the pros and cons to reunification? If there's a CWS case and that youth has been removed, are there pros and are there cons to reunifying that youth with the parents? I understand that might be
a big question. Yeah,
a large question.
I would just say, obviously, I don't work for child welfare, so but I work closely with child welfare, and I think generally speaking, reunifying is what we all want to do. We want to keep children with their families, and that's, data shows that's the best place a child could be, even if the family's struggling and in many ways. But child welfare does have to make those hard choices. Usually, that's going to happen in court with a lot of different parties talking about what's going on, and there is times where a youth goes to is not reunified, and they go into the adoption process, and there's other pathways, and there's pros and cons to that. It's extremely difficult work. It's just so tough, but I think everyone I know at child welfare and certainly mental health, we all strive to keep families functioning together, keep kids in the community, keep kids with their families, and I think that's the underlying drive. So.
Well, as someone who had a failed reunification with my biological parents, for me, like on a personal level, there was just huge advantages for me to have been removed in the first place, not only because of my prenatal drug exposure, sensory processing issues, various learning differences, and neurodiversity type stuff that came from that prenatal exposure, but also the displacement from my biological mother at birth, all created a need for a really safe, healing environment for me. And so the intervention from CWS and the removal of me, and my birth mother went out a window and down a fire escape, so it's not like she was like they were taking her from clutched fingers, but at that point what it allowed me to do was that immediate removal allowed me to not have been perpetrated against by my biological parent when they were under the influence. And so my biological parents, while under substance abuse, were not safe parents, and some of my siblings that remained with them for longer periods of time or did reunification efforts that ended up failing ended up suffering additional trauma that in some ways could have I think did result in a difference in terms of our perception of this person. And when I'm talking about my biological mom. And so I was really allowed to have a perspective where I saw her as being someone who is struggling, and it gave me kind of a distance to have that removal. And my biological parents were both people who ended up achieving really incredible things once they were sober. My biological father, he passed away, but he was in pursuit of his master's degree at HSU for psychology. And this is somebody who, during his drug addiction, had broken into a crematorium and poured out bodies looking for wedding rings he was going to sell for crack money. And if I had read about him on Lost Coast Outpost, my first thought wouldn't be that drug addict had very much value to society. My first thought would not be that he was funny. I would not think he was kind. I would not think he was intelligent enough to achieve higher education. And the beautiful part about all those wrong assumptions are that I would have been wrong about the person that I was reading about, and that some of our people who are doing, just some of the most deplorable acts and are perpetrators of violence themselves have roots in these difficult childhoods, and then also have the potential of having beautiful futures where they are resources to our communities. We are losing beautiful, valuable people down these paths, and they're the same paths that we're trying to divert our children from. And so for me, being placed with an adoptive family was incredibly rewarding for me to have that opportunity. But there's other families, and we've worked, like my family's had 115, 120 placements ourselves. And so I've seen beautiful positive sides for reunification where the system has worked to support and came up and been able to uplift a biological family to be able to reunify with their children and become just incredible examples of what's possible when we do that properly. So I believe reunification is appropriate if we're able to first and foremost always prioritize the experience of the child involved above all else. And then beyond that, if we're able to continue to create ways that we can support those families after they sever their ties with child welfare and have graduated and you know, check those boxes and become, you know, people who are off those caseloads, how are we continuing to support those families that are in that fragile state? And so I believe in reunification fully if it is one that is sponsored and supported by our community. I was like,
Thank you.
There are pros to cons to everything that we do in life, and there's no one right answer for reunification of our children. You never know if that family is one that's going to be able to change and to be a healthy place for that youth. And so I think that each time you come to that, it has to be looked at on a case-by-case basis, and CWS does the best they can in making those decisions. At times, it's not an easy job. I wouldn't want to have to be the one to make that decision. But reunification is also not a very easy process, which is one of the pros to it. So when you have the parents that aren't going to be able to get themselves together, it's a long period of time that they have to prove themselves before they're reunited with their child. But I've seen both. I've seen reunifications that have been very successful, and those parents, it's awesome to see how they're doing now. And then I've seen reunifications that have ended up with the kids back in the system. So you never know. We're all broken people. You never know how it's going to turn out, but it's doing the best you can at each time.
Thank you.
I worked in adoptions for 5 years, and I'm a psychotherapist at this point, and I've seen a lot of adults who grew up in toxic families, and one of them sued the department in Oregon for placing him back because he suffered a lot of harm in the foster care system. So I think that it is very complex, and when I talk to social workers, there is a school of thought who feel children under no circumstances should ever be permanently removed. And I see a lot of children, and one of the interesting things that I'd like to share is I had a social worker call and say, oh, you know, she's been sober for 6 months, and we're returning him. And he came in and he was talking about going back home, and he said, you know, she's still drinking, right? I said, I don't think the social worker knows. He says, well, I know, and nobody's listening to me. So I want to speak to the need to collaborate, that if the child has a therapist, talk to her and listen to her. And I've seen failures in that repeatedly. It is important the child have a voice, and very often the therapist is that voice. And he knew, and he was right. He was home for about 3 months and then taken out again when his mother tried to kill him. And he hid in the bathroom, and a neighbor heard him screaming and went to help. But she was drunk out of her mind. She would not have done that sober. So it can be very dangerous to return a child without supervision. And I recently saw that, you know, failed placement and returned after an already failed reunification, and returned again and returned without supervision. That kind of thing can't happen. Families need a lot of support when they get their children back, and part of that support means keep track of what's happening. Never order no supervision when you're just returning a child. So we have seen awful stuff with those kind of decisions being made, and there is a very strong school of thought. Never, don't if the family's toxic, and then happy endings. What I want to say is children can't wait for the happy endings. You know, and children aren't aspirin for their parents' problems. Is that we need a timeline, and there's a legislation that says by the age of 3 you have to make a permanent plan, but I haven't seen that followed. I've seen children in longer, staying in foster care longer while they try to solve the problems. That it's a very hard call to make, but it needs to be made, and it needs to be made collaboratively. Listen to the teacher. If the child has a therapist, listen to the therapist, and don't make decisions based on your own personal objection to children being removed. And it's terrible when they are removed, and I really strongly support doing everything you can, but often there aren't the resources to do that, and children are cut loose too soon. And they do know. I have never seen a child with a substance abusing parent who didn't know that their parents were going to drink again. And one little girl drew me a picture of a bottle, and in the bottle she had a heart, and she said, "My mother's heart is stuck in a bottle." She knew. We really need to listen to children. They know. And I don't think they get heard enough. So that's my spiel.
Thank you. And I think a lot of that echoes back to what Dr. Moorehead was saying earlier about developing more and more prevention programs, and that it can be really beneficial to have those supports in place so that when children are returned to family members, they have that support and that prevention so that there isn't a backslide. Because as we all know, sometimes we take 2 steps forward and 2 steps back, and if we don't have the supports to continue that forward progress, it gets difficult. Any comments to that?
I listen to children. I mean, that's just such wise words. I mean, that's what I know our staff try to do, is listen and lift up their voice. And, when I talked about the child and family team meetings, that's part of that process. But, that's something we all can do, is listen to kids. They are very good at telling us what's going on or showing us what's going on. So that's a big part of our jobs as adults. So.
Very good. Any questions from the audience? I have one that I haven't seen asked today, and so maybe I'll ask it. With suicide being either the first or second, depending on age group, leading cause of death for youth, what does the panel think could be done to improve our suicide prevention efforts locally?
I think we've seen an increase since quarantine. We had children in developmental stages where they needed socialization. They needed to be around people. They needed to learn all of those things. And now we have kids that don't know how to be in social settings. I have a child right now who knows how to be in social settings, but it causes a lot of anxiety. And sometimes they don't want to go out the door. They don't want to leave. I think it all boils back down to listening to our kids when they're talking to us, listening to what they're saying, how they're behaving, and taking those few moments to ask them those questions. Being aware of their behaviors is another big one. If you see an increase in negative behaviors, what can you do to spend a little extra time with that youth? We don't have a ton of counseling up here. Just as sad as it is, I have somebody who is looking to go to a counselor as a youth, and it has taken them 8 weeks before they can get in. So everybody that supports any youth, if you can just be that extra support, that alone goes a long ways in helping prevent that.
Yeah, I just add, something internally we're doing. We're working there. We had a training that a lot of our staff attended, and then we were able to do a contract with some of the people who created that training. It was about suicide for clinical staff, and now we're doing some focus groups internally with our clinical staff, looking at how we're screening and how we're managing suicidality and the symptoms that we're seeing, and trying to move forward with better screening tools, doing a better job of screening every kid in a better way, and just being more data driven and more on top of it. And so I think that's really hopeful in terms of our clinical work that we're doing at the county, which I'm really excited about that. And I think we're having access to better trainings now for staff, which is also great too. Staff really need repeated trainings, because it's a really hard topic and it's something hard to work with. So that's a positive. But it's a huge challenge, and I think there's good trainings in like QPR and some other trainings in the community that are available to just about anyone. It's really positive to be involved with those, so that when you come across somebody, you can talk to them about what's happening for them. So.
Come on up.
So I'm one of the peer coaches with.
Talk into the microphone, then everyone can hear you. Yeah.
I'm with the Transition Age Youth Division. Our behavioral health division supports alternatives groups to help with suicide. One of the groups is called Alternatives to Suicide, which is an online support group. It's Mondays from 6 to 7:30, and it's over Zoom. And there's extra weekly groups through holiday season through January 6th on Thursdays as well. I have a flyer. I only have one left, but I have a flyer if people want to come take pictures of it.
If we get that flyer to Cozy too, we can actually blast that out on the city's social media as well. Thank you. Anyone who needs a picture of it, just check in with Cozy. We can do that. But
we have one.
All right, Laura, I think it looked like you were gonna say something.
Yeah. And I've heard some pretty wonderful things about utilizing technology in counseling and mental health stuff. And so one little plug is maybe finding ways to have the lack of providers be supplemented by a push to, in the meantime, be utilizing any, avenues we have. And we know our youth are connected to these technologies. And so if we can find or even, create beautiful methods for them to be involved or have a buy-in into some of those resources might be great. And I guess in terms of my idea of resiliency, personally, I think it was being born into a body that with prenatal drug exposure that I had so little control over. I had impaired depth perception, which led me to be super clumsy in publicly embarrassing ways, but also just like painful ways that ended up leading to different incidences in my life where I was been feeling like I was slowly becoming more and more disabled. I had a brain injury when I was 12 that was traumatic and almost life-ending, and I lost hearing in my right ear permanently, and among other things. But I really believe that it was being born into a body that I had so little control over that really forced me to prioritize the amount of control that I found I had over my perception and how my own perception of the world and myself and what was happening, how much of an influence it had over my lived experience. And I found that I could be living a life full of adversity and hardships and be experiencing and being involved in writing a really beautiful, empowering, exciting story that I get to live out as myself. And so if we can build in these children this kind of well of gratitude, and I found, like that my story kind of led me to be appreciative and feel grateful for things that I think other people would feel like it wasn't as much of a gift. But I found ways to look at that adversity and learn from it and take as much as I could from it in ways that allowed me to feel stronger because of that adversity. And so then it ended up, making me feel like I was in a greater seat of control over my destiny and my choice to be here in the first place and my investment in myself. And I do find that children and all humans are occupied with this sense of our own self-worth. And when we're talking about suicide, we're talking about people getting to a point where they feel like the world might be better without them, or they're getting to a point of overwhelm where they, can't stand existing here anymore. And I think we have a future that feels like it's full of uncertainty. And I feel like there's a lot of media and exposure that these children have that are telling them that the future they're heading towards is something that's worth fearing. And so I think if we can find ways to have children realize that they are narrating these stories that they're living, and that it is very exciting for them to be them, and that exactly what had to happen and exactly who they are is necessary, and we can give them purpose by involving all of our families and involving children in service opportunities. And so as I was raised in a family where we, I didn't even realize it because we were just doing a bunch of fun stuff, but everything we did as a family was entrenched in all of these incredible service organizations. We raised guide dogs for the blind. My family was, taking in baby newborns. We did wildlife care center work. And so we did wildlife rescue, where we went out on calls at midnight to rescue a pelican off the beach or bottle fed, baby deer. And all of these things just added up into this undeniable fact that I can use my time and energy and efforts, and when I do that, I can make the world a better place. And that feels powerful, and I remember, kids are raised on all these stories, and I want to encourage all of us to invest in childhood literacy, but I almost get worried that we're encouraging them to read all these beautiful stories of all these grand lives that are being led and all these people that are changing the world. And I'm worried, we can't encourage them to believe that's possible without believing that it's possible for themselves, and we want to invest children in nature, but we need to take care of the environment if we're going to tell them that becoming a part of it or feeling connected to the natural world is something that can anchor you here in a beautiful way. We need to be showing that value by protecting the environment and investing in our children's futures. And so, so they know that we're investing in them, so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we're about 5 minutes to closing. Any final comments from the panel? It's okay if there isn't.
I just thank you, appreciation for everyone coming, sharing your, what you're doing in the community and your concerns and your questions. I mean, it's just so important that we're having these conversations and lifting up the voice of kids and families. I mean, it's just it's a big part of the solution. If we want to make these changes, we have to be talking to each other and getting together. So thank you so much for showing up.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Okay, so as I've been listening, I was listening to what everybody had to say, and I was looking through this book, Reframe Your Brain. Remember back when we did the mental health services, and that was the slogan, Reframe Your Brain. It's here. The book has arrived. And Laura, I'm surprised you haven't read it already, because everything you said is in here. We need Laura's, and we need all of you to read this, because this is the kind of resiliency that's going to pull our community together. So I just want to read the one on page 229, the operating system for your mind. The usual frame is that you are the product of your experiences and genes. The reframe is you are the author of your experience. You are amazing.
Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie.
Thank you. Any other last thoughts? All right. So we're going to wrap things out. I want to thank everyone for coming and everyone who's watching on Zoom. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate the turnout and coming and having this conversation. It's super, super important that we continue this. We will be having another town hall this year. We're looking at December 2nd. That's a Saturday. And we don't have a flashy title yet, but the topic will be on substance use disorders and treatment. So if you'd like to learn more about that or come and participate in that, we invite you to come out. The talk for this one will continue. Eureka has a new kind of social platform for engaging the public. That's talk.eurekaca.gov. And if you'd like to follow up and leave comments on this town hall series, just add a /town hall to that URL and you'll be able to do that. It does require a sign up. Please remember to be respectful and courteous of everyone else. We're all one community. I super appreciate everyone's focus on community today. I think that's so important. The more that we come together as a community, the more we can kind of lift each other up, because living life alone is hard. So we're all here together. I'd like to give things to Mayor Virgil for our closing statement.
Thank you. Again, I just want to thank everybody who came out today. This has been a very important conversation. There's been a lot learned, and I hope that we can carry on with the conversation. As I was sitting here today, I was thinking of that saying, and I can't remember who says it, but it's a man. He says something to the effect of, people don't remember what we said to them. They remember how we made them feel. That gives me chills. That's such an important piece of living in a community, is to be there for each other. And, I enjoyed listening to the whole panel, but one thing that I really heard tonight was community and proximity. It's really challenging to be of support to somebody when you aren't in their bubble or even have access to them. I mean, I guess you could pray for them, but there are avenues that we can take that we can actually make positive impacts and be great role models for our community. And I just am so grateful and thankful that we have this opportunity to have these conversations. Next one will be substance use, and we'd love to have you all here. So with that, I would say happy Saturday. And that's a wrap. Thank you so much. Oh, and thank you to the panelists. You were awesome.